The next thing I'd like to talk about is series versus parallel. So in order to set up a circuit, I'm going to need a power supply. I'm going to bring out a 9-volt power supply this time. R lets you rotate components, and I'm going to drop it right over there. So series and parallel comes into play when you have more than one component that you want to provide power to. So in this example, I'm going to have 2 LEDs. I'm going to change the color of one of them so that I can more easily tell which one I'm talking about. In both cases, it's a good idea to protect your LEDs with resistors. 100 ohms seemed to work pretty well before, so that's what I'm going to use. Okay, so how would I go about connecting these? If we hover over this end over here, you can see that this is what's supposed to connect to the positive. This is what's supposed to connect to the negative. So what if I just started out? I know that this is the shorter leg of the LED, so that's what's supposed to go to the negative. Okay, and then this should go on to the positive. So is this going to work? It is going to work, but I still have way too much power flowing through because I upgraded my the size of my power supply. So I'm going to change these. Let's try 500. That's better. So I will change this one too. Okay, so I now have a complete circuit for one light. But what if I want more than one light? So let's say that I'm going to start out at positive. I'm going to go to this first LED, and then maybe I will go from that LED's negative. This is very twisty, goodness, to this one's positive, and this one's negative is going to go all the way back to my battery. So it's a little loop-de-loop looking, but let's see if we can follow the path. So I'm going to leave positive, go through this LED, through the resistor, through this LED, through its resistor, and back to ground. Let's see what happens. They both light up. So this is an example of 2 LEDs in series. So think of a series of movies or a series of books. One takes place after the other. They're all lined up in a row, one to the next to the next. Once you read the first one or watch the first one, then you do the second one. In this case, once I kind of start on the path of lighting up this light, the only way I can complete the circuit is also by going through this light and continuing back. So this is an example of a series circuit. Gonna undo those. Okay, so what would be an example of a parallel circuit? Here, I'm gonna start out the same. I'm gonna connect to my first LED. And then I'm gonna go back to ground. Okay. At the same time, I'm gonna run a completely different circuit. Not a completely different circuit, a completely different path. I'm gonna make it orange so that we can see that it's different. Okay, so now if I start out here, I can follow the green path through this LED back to ground, or I can follow the orange path through the LED and back to ground. You can see that if I run this simulator, both of these light up. This is called a parallel circuit. So here I have 2 things in parallel. 2 things exist next to each other, right? Not touching, but going in the same place. They both start at positive and end at negative, but are kind of separate from each other than that. This is a parallel set of LEDs. So when I leave red, I don't necessarily have to go through green. I have my own circuit here. If I leave through orange, I'm gonna light up the green. I don't necessarily have to have anything to do with red over here. All right, so that's an example of series versus parallel. Why would you want one or the other? Well, let's imagine lights in a room, okay? So if you have a series of lights and one of them burns out, what happens to the rest? They don't turn on. Because your first light bulb, for example, has burned out, it is no longer connecting the circuit. It's not passing electricity correctly through that circuit. There's a gap there. So the whole rest of your circuit is not going to run. More commonly, we have, for example, in classrooms, we have sets in parallel so that if one light bulb goes out, the rest are going to keep running. Okay, so that's series versus parallel.